we're joined today by a very cool looking Dr. Phillip George. He's called Indiana George today.
Waiting for the next adventure.
Now let's get to our Mind Matters for today. Our first article, this is pretty interesting because it actually says that negative thinking is linked to dementia later in life. So how does thinking negatively actually lead to dementia?
Well, we actually have evidence that depression can be a predictor for dementia in later life. Now, depression, as you know, has a lot of negative thinking. It's a negative triad that Aaron Beck actually suggested, the negative view of self, of environment, and of future. But this new study actually links just negative thinking specifically. And it was, a feature that was measured among 350 people over the age of 55 for over 2 years. And then they did special scans to show that the negative thinking was linked to more tau and beta amyloid buildup. Now, these are two sort of protein deposits that are found, especially in Alzheimer's disease, Alzheimer's dementia. And it was also linked with memory and cognitive problems. But is this true for the great population? Because, that's a small sample size. It's only 350 people, and they were already at risk of developing Alzheimer's dementia. So, yeah, we still need more studies to try and identify whether it's just the negative thinking alone or if it's connected to something else. But we actually know that being positive can be protective for heart and lung health. And optimism has actually has been shown to be, something that promotes healthier diets, more exercise behavior, better health habits, leading to a stronger immune system. And, so I guess it's a combination of many things. I don't think it's, going to be revolutionary, but I think it's important for us to identify, are we the glass half empty or the glass half full people sort of thing.
Yeah, but if we are a pessimist, the glass is always half empty and always thinking negatively, how can we sort of train our minds to not think so negatively so that we are not at risk for Alzheimer's or dementia?
Well, the same researcher, Aaron Beck, actually suggested that we can be in control of our mind and our thinking, and that we can influence how we think about things as well. So he suggested cognitive therapy, which is challenging the distortions that we have in our mind, the negative thoughts that we have about ourselves, about our future, about our environment, and finding evidence to show that it may not necessarily be true, and that we are maybe spending, too much effort and time just focusing on the negatives. So, I think it's about looking after our mental health. And that means this is not just, focusing on people with mental illness. It's a public health issue that everybody needs to identify. What are their mental health needs? And we can train our minds then to become more positive. Just like, you go to the gym and do physical training to train your muscles to be more strong. The same thing we can do with our minds. 30 minutes a day of maybe cognitive therapy, mindfulness, meditation, coupled with breathing or relaxation techniques and exercise. These can produce significant changes in a short period of time. In fact, in about 2 weeks, if we regularly do this. I usually advise my patients to invest and dedicate time in mental health hygiene. It's like what we do every morning with our teeth. We brush our teeth, gargle, and all of that. We don't have cavities and decay and all of that just yet, but we're preventing tooth decay. And the same way, we need to spend time and energy on our mental health as well.
Does acknowledging that we constantly have negative thoughts help to sort of change that?
Yeah, I mean,
because some people don't even realize that they're pessimists,
No, you're absolutely right. And sometimes it's others who actually point that out to them. And so it's important to take on, what others say about ourselves and our reaction to things, and identify, is this something that I need to address in my own life? Or am I comfortable being this way? Because the evidence is showing that by being negative actually increases our risk for other problems.
Actually, also on that note, Dr. Phil, How big an impact does environment cause in someone being very negative? So if you hang out with very negative people, you will be negative. How can you get yourself out of that environment?
Well, avoiding is not going to be the easiest. You can't sort of change others, but what you can do is try and be positive in the light of negative environments and people around you. So you identify positive things that you can bring to the whole scenario. In fact, you can be the person who changes their mindset. So you don't have to be the sponge that absorbs all this negativity, but you can be the game changer, the person who actually makes others think more positive as well.
And in worst case scenarios, you got to cut out the weeds and detach, right?
Yeah. In some instances,
in some instances,
yeah, maybe it's the amount of exposure that you get. You want to control that and then identify a mixture or balance, really.
Great. Now, next one. We've recently been inundated with news of drunk drivers causing harm and death to other road users, and authorities have actually proposed to ban alcohol until this whole matter is resolved. Now, from a psychiatrist's point of view, what is the best way to deal with this issue?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to be careful, that we're careful not to have a knee-jerk reaction to this. It has been highlighted recently as a problem, but it's been there for a long time. And I think we need to identify the prime issue, which is really drink driving, not drinking. And so the main thing is really enforcement. I mean, people who drink drive, I'm sure when they go to other countries where the rules and regulations are so strict and penalties are heavy, they don't even think about doing it. So, I think it's about, if there is strict and consistent enforcement, then people yield and start to follow. It's similar to the no smoking rule that came in only just recently, cafes, restaurants, and because enforcement was so good, it's actually become a norm. People disdain and look terribly at others who pull out a cigarette in a common, place. So I think similarly, if we have good enforcement, we can actually control this much better than, maybe saying that diabetes is on the rise, so we got to stop selling sugar. That's a knee-jerk reaction thing. So I think we have to identify what the real issue is and then work on how to improve so that doesn't become, out of hand.
So these people who drink and then drive, it's not like they are addicted to alcohol or, that substance as a substance.
Yeah, so it can be a variety of things. I mean, of course, a lot of people who plan to go outing and get inebriated, they make a decision to drive. And that's during a period when they're not intoxicated. They made that decision prior to actually going, to then get intoxicated. So which means they felt that they were, not, that they were safe. There was no real danger of them doing that. They were not under the influence. But once they do drink, then there is a risk of, being disinhibited, having poor judgment and decision making. And so even if they exceed the amounts that are legally accepted, they may make the wrong decision then. So I think it's important that they understand and be educated that, if they are planning to go on a night out or something, that they look at alternative means of travel and, never consider this as an option. And I think that's what most countries have instilled in the population, So it's something that we can also instill in people. It includes education, it includes strict enforcement as well.
Actually, on that, Dr. Phil, because you said stricter enforcement, which is instill fear in them. If you do this, you're going to get in trouble. Yet, on the other hand, you have, like in the US, you have Alcoholics Anonymous, where every single year you seem to see more and more people go to Alcoholics Anonymous, but the problem doesn't actually seem to go away. Like, which is there's no one proper solution to actually fix the mental state of an alcoholic, is there?
Well, you see, the thing is, an alcoholic, that's a lay term, but an alcohol dependent is already a disease. And once they hit that stage, then they need to get into treatment. Now, people who drink drive are not necessarily alcohol dependent. They may be going out on the one night per week or one night per month, or
Right.
and they're not really fit the criteria of dependence per se. But I think they need to also learn that from this there are outcomes and negative effects, and some countries actually have mandatory treatment that they have to undergo, mandatory counseling and treatment if they're caught for drink driving. So that also helps identify those who may be at higher risk of dependence and need additional treatment to help them get over that dependence as an illness as well.
I think as a society also, if you're out with your friends, you need to stress that if they have drank a little bit too much, they cannot drive home. And as a friend or as a neighbor, you have to help them in getting them an e-hailing or things like that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's everyone's responsibility. It's not just the individual. I mean, just like smoking in public places, people call them out or videotape them or photograph them, and then it gets viral. And so the same thing with drink driving. I think it has to be something that everyone is responsible for.
All right. Let's move on to our next article. Let's talk about reentry anxiety, doctor. What is reentry anxiety? Something that all of us are feeling right now, I guess.
Yeah. As we move on to the RMCO, which starts today, it's going to be something that some people will experience, this re-entry anxiety. In fact, it's already been identified in countries like France and Spain and Italy. And so it can be something that people will experience, just like the period of lockdown of MCO, when we experience anxiety over being locked up and not being able to do the other things that we used to do. It's like an adjustment disorder. And here we're moving from the cozy comfort of our home, and then now venturing outside to things that can provoke some stress. It's in some countries dubbed as the turtle defense, or the French call it the snail syndrome. But some of the factors include that although the spread of COVID-19 is slowing, the curve seems to be flattening, the virus is still out there. And so many people may be reluctant to commute or mingle in crowds or be in their workspace with others. The fear of catching the virus and interacting with others can actually trigger this anxiety. But we need to look at it in a different perspective as well. Some anxiety is actually good for us because it can help us to remember to maintain physical distancing. It can help us to remember to avoid crowded and confined spaces, and to continue to do hand hygiene and wear protective gear. So I think a little bit of anxiety is useful. And most of the time, just like with the MCO, the initial anxiety or adjustment takes a while, and then we get accustomed and comfortable with it. And, it starts the new norm, basically.
Now, Doc, is it only anxiety about catching COVID-19 or passing it on to others?
Yeah, well, I think it's a combination of many things. I mean, some may have risk factors themselves. If you're of a certain age and above, if you have hypertension or diabetes and other risk factors that have been identified as, increasing the risk of contracting the disease, these can actually increase the risk of anxiety. If we already have, past history of anxiety or other risk factors for anxiety, that can increase the risk for us as well. And then, of course, moving from a comfort zone that we've built for ourselves into a new normal, that whole thing requires change. And I think that all of these factors can, trigger anxiety as well.
So what can we do to ease this re-entry anxiety?
Well, I think the first thing is, again, go back to the same things that we employed when we were down in, the MCO, how to control the anxiety there. Identify what is in our control and what is not. I mean, again, you know, the safety measures that we take, those things are all under our control. Maintain those things that we started up, you know, our daily exercise or mindfulness or meditation or yoga, maintain them, because our anxiety needs all these buffers. And, you know, we can't just go back into normal work life and then discard all those things that we put into our, you know, processes to help with anxiety earlier as well. I think also re-enter slowly. And if we can discuss this, negotiate this with our employers, it'll be important to see how we can gradually, you know, re-enter, rather than just, you know, tomorrow straight away do A to Z that we used to do before. And, you know, in that slow re-entry, we also identify changes in our lifestyle that we can actually, you know, continue with our workplace, our commute, and other things that, you know, will prevent the spread of this virus as well. And I think if it gets too overwhelming, then we need to maybe seek help. And professional help, I think there's no embarrassment or shame in actually looking for help, because it will definitely, you know, help us to get, you know, anxiety under control, and then give us a better quality of life as well.
All right, great. Okay, let's move on to our next article, all about how physical health and mental health is co-related in that way. They're very closely intertwined. Why do people with mental health issues have a higher risk of falling ill?
Well, actually, it's a well-known fact that people with mental health issues have higher medical morbidity. In fact, we did a study among patients of a heart center, and those who had heart disease, about 50% had high scores on depression scales. Now, this could have been prior to their heart disease, or it could be a result of the heart disease. But we do know that people with mental health problems have a higher risk of developing medical problem. There was a thought that it could be a behavioral thing, that, you know, people who have depression and anxiety tend to neglect things like their health hygiene, you know, their healthy habits, or they neglect their diet as well, their well-being. All these things become secondary when they experience anxiety and depression. And this then increases the risk for their medical problems. But this is not the only factor. And so this study actually identified that it could be also the elevated stress hormones, you know, the cortisol that our body secretes. This actually is secreted especially during stress periods. And in depression and anxiety, there's a sustained release. And, you know, cortisol in our body actually reduces our immune system. And it contributes to a inflammatory sort of condition in our body as well, in our mind and our body. And so that triggers off medical problems. You know, so we've seen, in fact, in my practice, I see patients with depression and anxiety developing eczema, skin disease, or, you know, hypertension or diabetes. And we know from research that there is a very close link between untreated depression and diabetes and hypertension as well.
Wow. Okay. So it's that closely linked. But like, which do we have to cure first then to lead a happy and healthy life? Should we cure the mental health issue or the physical health issue first?
Well, I think the important thing is to address both. And, you know, from our study that we did with the patients with heart disease, it was identified that if we actually had a multidisciplinary team helping patients like this, a psychologist or a psychiatrist on the same cardiology team, and then identifying mental health issues among them, they had better outcomes. They had less risk of repeat heart disease or heart attacks, and they had less morbidity related to their, you know, heart condition as well. So I think it's always important to address both. You know, very often in stroke patients, for example, 50% of stroke patients can develop depression. And that depression can interfere with their recovery from their stroke because they're not engaged in physiotherapy and all the other therapies that help with recovery. Now, if you don't treat the depression and only focus on the stroke, you're not going to get the outcomes that you hope. So I think it's always important to address both, and ideally, a holistic approach for all patients with these chronic lifestyle diseases is the best way.
Because it's like a vicious cycle, isn't it? Some people are depressed because they're unfit, and then then they don't work out because they're depressed. So it just keeps going round and round in circles, and they don't get the dopamine, they don't get the endorphins, and then they get even more sick after that.
Well, it's like the chicken and egg thing, So they're unfit maybe because they're depressed and they don't want to focus on their, building themselves to be fit, or they could have had a lifestyle that was leading them to be unfit, and then that led to depression and anxiety, and then the medical problems as well. So it's all interlinked, and I think we need to address this together in all these conditions as well.
You were saying earlier that cortisol, the hormone cortisol, is one of the triggers for all these different mental health issues and physical health issues. Is there a way that we can sort of suppress cortisol without taking medication?
Well, actually, cortisol is known to be controlled and sort of managed by mental health hygiene, the things that we discussed earlier. So regular exercise, meditation, mindfulness, yoga, all of these things actually have a huge impact on cortisol. Because it's the stress hormone, if we can manage our stress, we're actually contributing to both our mental well-being as well as our physical well-being.
So it's all down to stress. So if you have no stress in life, you'll be happy and healthy.
But that's another thing, though. I mean, like earlier on with that thing, because it's about pressure also, it's about the label, because we're talking about anxiety. There's good pressure and bad pressure. Good pressure makes you work harder. But then if you look at anxiety as, oh no, the world is going to end and everything, if you label it differently, you're like, oh, I'm going to take this on and I'm going to work even harder, isn't it? It's just how you label things sometimes.
No, I mean, again, there's an optimum level of stress. Everyone works the best at that optimum level. If you have no stress, it actually creates more cortisol production. So because you can't perform, and then that leads to more stress and stuff,
Then you get even more depressed, and then I'm like, I'm no good in this world. What's the point of me being around and stuff like this, right?
Okay.
Exactly right.
All right, this is our final article, and this article actually says that the human touch is good for our health. So the question here, doctor, is how does a touch help to improve our health?
Well, human connection again is, part of. Sorry, can I start that again?
Yeah.
So humans are basically social animals, and human connection is part of that important aspect of us being social. It's good for mental health hygiene. The friendly touch, the pat in the back, the handshake, the hug. Studies have actually shown that just doing this can lower our blood pressure and our heart rate in the light of a stressful task. So this touch actually first decreases the stress hormone cortisol, but can also stimulate the release of oxytocin, which is sometimes termed as the cuddle hormone. And oxytocin promotes a feeling of devotion, trust, and bonding. The area of the brain that's involved is the orbitofrontal cortex, which is just above the eye. That part of the brain. And this is the same area that gets stimulated by sweet taste. So if you have a nice muffin, a good piece of chocolate, or pleasing smells. So, you smell lavender and you feel relaxed. So it's like a rewarding stimuli, basically. So, it can actually be very beneficial, especially at work. You get a pat on the back from the boss, that's like and it seems to be evolutionary because it stems from our primary caregivers as infants. When we come out, baby is delivered, the first thing they do is bring the baby straight to the mother's womb. Mother's arms. And so this is actually something that is innate in us. It helps physically by strengthening our immune system And again, like I said, it lowers our blood pressure and also regulates our heart rate as well.
Wow, imagine a hug can make you feel healthier.
Yeah.
Doctors all around the world will be out of business. But of course, I mean, in this time where we're all encouraged to maintain a physical distance from others, you know, we're not allowed to shake hands or hug our friends or family. What else can we do to sort of maintain that connection with others and also to help release the oxytocin?
Well, you know, the funny thing is, although our brain is such a complex organ, it really can't distinguish between someone else's touch and our own. So
we can touch ourselves?
yep.
We can hug
In
ourselves?
isolation, we can create the same release by hugging or touching ourselves. Touching a pet or petting a pet, you know, that can also be a good alternative. There are many other substitutes as well, like connecting via online platforms for family, doing things like, you know, dancing online together with someone else, even though there's no connection, there's no physical connection, it can, you know, derive that sort of the same sense. And so virtual dance parties actually have been suggested to actually stimulate oxytocin release as well. Another factor that also stimulates the same love hormone is altruistic behavior. And I think Shankar Santaram wrote an article recently about this, that acting selflessly towards others can actually promote the same reaction. And so being good and kind to our colleagues or those in distress will also trigger the same oxytocin secretion.
All right. So we can hug ourselves and do good.
Exactly. But there's a danger. I mean, like if this continues, social distancing continues, and we don't know when it's ever going to end, how dangerous is that to our mental state as a society?
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, I mean, there are different ways that we can, I mean, there are the alternatives, and I think we need to now invest in the alternatives. Don't have a pet, maybe you get one. You know, maybe you want to do the virtual shake or, you know, other measures of greeting.
That's all. I was just wondering, like, there are all these virtual, augmented reality kind of things. Does that work? Because a lot of people have been going into all these other worlds to have Raya get-togethers and whatnot.
Right.
Will that work? I mean, is that an alternative?
It's not as great as the real touch, and I don't think it'll work 100%. But it's important to, you know, add that on to your armamentarium. So you know, add other new things that increase the opportunity for the oxytocin and reward stimuli.
Does it have to be skin to skin touching, Doc? Because I remember reading about this thing they call a cuddle curtain. So it's like a plastic sheet, and then you get gloves, and then you cuddle someone. Will it help that way?
Well, I don't think there's enough research to show whether it does help or not. But they've done research with monkeys. You know, monkeys were just born and separated from their mothers, and they found that the oxytocin could still be released with them cuddling a metal, you know, sort of a model of their mother. So, you know, it doesn't necessarily maybe in human beings also have to be the human touch, but a perceived human touch, you know. So
Understood.
But I suppose that's why mothers, when they give birth to their babies, instantly they want skin to skin touching.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what creates the bonding for the baby as well. And if that's delayed or not, you know, enforced, then sometimes that can interfere with their own development as well.